Hi, everybody. This is Mitch Tanenbaum. Thanks for joining me today. This is the security news update for April 17th, 2022. First item is a bigger than average breach and probably potentially more important to some of our clients. Lakeview Loan Servicing, who claims to be the fourth largest loan servicer in the United States, was breached. How we found out about it was through the Maine Attorney General, not through Lakeview, although they did publish something on their website, but who's going to look on any random website? And the Maine AG apparently has a pretty extensive process that's maybe easy to use, because you see a lot of these breaches that are reported come from the Maine Attorney General's website. So this breach happened between the hackers were inside between October 27th and December 7th. So that's about a month and a half, roughly. The breach was discovered on January 31st. That's another month and a half. So now we're at 3 months. And consumers were notified on March 18th. That's another month and a half. So that's like almost 5 months, 4.5 months. They're not going to get in trouble for not notifying people, back in October, November timeframe, because they didn't know about it. But many of the state laws say you have to report in 30 days. Colorado being an example of that, and Florida being another one, although Florida does have a one-time extension if you ask pretty please. So, people need to really figure out how we're going to report really quickly, because there's not a lot of time in this stuff. I don't know that Lakeview was necessarily trying to be obtuse about this. I'm guessing they were trying to understand the scope of it. But nonetheless, 45 days to report after they found out about it does not meet the requirements of the law. So just FYI. And now we're seeing with critical infrastructure, there's a requirement to notify 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, depending on where you are and who your regulator is. So I think we're going to see a lot more of this, and you ought to be prepared to figure that out. So in the case of Lakeview, hackers stole information on about 2.5 million people. I don't know that represents their whole portfolio. I'm guessing not. It sounds a little small for somebody that is the fourth largest servicer. And more importantly, what they stole was the entire customer package. So, if Lakeview had the loan package, then the loan package is in the wild too for, some number of millions of people. That would be the loan app, maybe credit reports, maybe tax returns. Who knows what was in the loan package? But that's a biggie. And it just points to this whole vendor risk management thing, right? Just because you're assigning the responsibilities to a subservicer, assuming they are still loans owned by you, then you're liable. And what does your contract say? Who gets to foot the bill? If you get to spend, let's say there's 2 million people here, so someone may spend $10 million. Whose $10 million is that? And that doesn't count the lawsuits, and I'm sure there'll be a bunch of those by the time this is done. So this is really a reminder. Two things. One is to make sure that you can report quickly, and the second is to make sure that you understand for vendors who's liable and who's responsible and who's going to do whatever needs to be done. So important word to the wise. On a somewhat lighter note, a police officer pulled over a driverless vehicle in San Francisco. The driverless vehicle was a Chevy Cruze. It's one of those vehicles that doesn't even have a steering wheel or gas and brake pedals. So obviously nobody was driving it because there's nothing to drive. Not sure who he asked for the license and registration from. Not even sure what the law is, right? If there's no driver, then, what do you do? And, I think this refers to accidents, same problem with accidents. And I suppose they could try giving a ticket to a passenger, but the passenger's defense was, I wasn't driving the car, I was a passenger. And the owner, I suppose they could give the ticket to the owner, but the owner's I wasn't even in the car at the time, assuming he wasn't, or she. So I think, we're going to need to figure that out, figure out how the liability works, how the insurance works. But this is just kind of a funny thing. That on a positive note there, The cruise apparently is designed when it sees flashing lights to pull over. It did that. It slowed down and then it crossed an intersection and pulled over to the curb. So that part was okay. It's not clear what the police officer did once he discovered there was no driver in the car. Next alert is related to the Spring 4 shell. Spring is another Java framework. You know, we're seeing lots and lots of Java attacks just because there's so much Java out there. You know, this is kind of like Log4j, and we're starting to see that as well in terms of, yes, this is integrated into all kinds of things. I think VMware actually created it, and so they use it in some of their products, and they've put out an alert. But Trend Micro says it's already being used to infect systems with botnet malware. So this is going to happen. You should obviously look to see whether you're using it, and if you're not using it, you know, how many of your vendors are using it, and in what products, and are those products visible to the internet? You know, all those would affect your risk calculation. In terms of patches, Cisco has released some patches for their wireless controller. You know, this is kind of a Wi-Fi aggregator device that they make, and it is an authentication bypass. So it allows a bad guy who can get to the management interface, which means either the management interface is exposed externally, or the bad guy is already somewhere in your network with some potentially low-level permissions. And if they can do that, then they can bypass the login, get into the device, and do that. And Cisco has released a patch for that, so that's good. Next on the patch circuit is Apache Struts. You may remember the Apache Struts bug. That was the one that took down Equifax. And there was a lot of scrambling after that came out. Well, now it turns out that the patch really wasn't fully patched, and so there's now kind of son of Apache Struts patch. So assume that, again, you're gonna have a lot of vendors who are using Apache Struts, and you know, is their software affected by this, and are you vulnerable as a result of that, and who's responsible? So kind of ponder all that. In the legislative and legal section, login.gov is interesting. You may remember that the IRS got in trouble for using login.gov to actually try to reduce fraud, tax fraud, because I don't know. I mean, if you're a pessimist, you could say because all the congressmen are crooks, and so they don't want to cut down on tax fraud. But that's probably a bit of a pessimistic view of the universe. You know, so the IRS said, well, we're not going to go off and I'm sorry, they were not using login.gov. They were using ID.me. Login.gov is the government solution. And of course, the government solution is no good. First of all, it doesn't scale up because Congress has refused to give the login.gov enough money to scale it up. And second of all, it doesn't have any identity verification capability in it. And third is run by another private company, which is LexisNexis. So I don't know if it's any better, but what the IRS has said they're going to go do for right now is they're going to go off and use login.gov, but layer on top of that their own manual identity verification process. I'm sure that will be just as undisputable as the past identity verification process. But login.gov said basically, well, we don't know about this facial recognition stuff. We're going to go off and kick that can down the road for a bit. So still login.gov, even after all this nonsense, does not have any kind of identity verification capability and won't for the foreseeable future. But the IRS, for political reasons, is going to use them and then layer some manual, probably hokey process on top of it. We'll see whether it works or doesn't work, but we'll find out. And in the right to repair world, this is actually good news. Last week, I reported that Samsung announced that they were partnering with iFixit to sell parts to consumers. Now, Google has said that they are going to sell parts for their Pixel phones. And actually, iFixit's going to sell those parts for them. So you'll be able to get both the parts and the instructions from iFixit. So, I think there's still, Apple has done this too. I think there's a lot of people like John Deere, for example, who's resisting right to repair, but I think they're going to lose the battle. And I think these phone manufacturers and consumer electronics manufacturers are realizing that they're going to lose that battle and are trying to, put some kind of positive spin on this. We shall see. Apple is going after Congress through lobbying, saying that forcing them to let people actually pay a reasonable price for credit card services is not a good thing. It's not a good thing for Apple, right? I mean, they charge 30% right now, which is a goodly funding source for Apple. And if they actually had to charge a reasonable credit card fee like 3%, well, there goes a lot of revenue. So they're saying, and they're saying this is, well, it's bad for consumers. Choice is bad for consumers because consumers are stupid and they can't make good choices. And it's bad for vendors because they're stupid too. I mean, they're not saying that, but that's effectively what they're saying. So, they're not happy. The bad news is that there are bills pending both in the U.S. and in Europe that would force the issue. So lobbying notwithstanding, assuming these bills pass, and I think the odds are better than not, because there's a lot of people who are unhappy with Apples of the world because of their monopolistic tendencies, and so they might just pass the bill just to spite them. I think Apple is going to lose this deal, but they're going to go down fighting because it just means so much money. I mean, it's got to be billions of dollars to Apple, so they're not going to go down without a fight. Next, on the legal front, the North Koreans are responsible, according to the feds, for the Ronin hack. That's a decentralized finance hack that whacked them about $600 million, or a little bit more than that, 640 million, as I recall. And we've said for a long time that North Korea finances their world by virtue of theft. And here's a perfect example of $600 million is probably a goodly number for them. And they'd like to, the trick is going to be, how do you cash it out? And we'll see whether they're successful at that. I'm sure everybody is watching that particular wallet to see whether or not, money moves off of it. But, there's ways to do it. And, they're really motivated. $600 million is a lot of motivation. In the education department, Microsoft has released announced, they haven't released anything. They've announced that they have discovered that the Hafnium hackers, those are the guys that took down Microsoft Exchange recently, and they're a Chinese hacking group, has figured out a new way to hide malware on computers. And what they're doing is they're creating bogus scheduled tasks, and then they're running the scheduled tasks. So, will endpoint protection detect that? Maybe. They certainly won't detect the fact that there's a bogus task there. Will they detect the task when it's running? Well, maybe, maybe not. If it's just some in memory, something or other, it might not. So it's not clear how endpoint protection is going to work here, but it's pretty clever. And for those of you who are interested in understanding how the world actually works, that's a good place to look about that. A handful of breaches, and there's more later here, but a handful of breaches. Fox News exposed about 60 gigabytes of data, including PII. Their defense was it was a test network, but it had live data in it. And so, first, words to the wise: just because it's a test doesn't mean you shouldn't protect it. Second, just because it's test doesn't mean you should use live data in it. There are plenty of data scrambling tools out there which would enable you to take that live data and scramble it and have it still be effective. And if you're not doing that now, if you are using live data in test network, then I would consider changing that practice, because it's just too risky. But that's 60 gigabytes of data. And then a follow-on to the Axie Affinity breach. This is the one I just talked about a minute ago. We were wondering how they were going to go make consumers whole. We've now heard how that's going to happen. The VCs that are backing the cryptocurrency industry, along with, and that includes some competitors, have agreed to bail them out. What the terms of this sort of semi-extortion is, I don't know, but the VCs are not doing it for free. But on the other hand, they also know that if consumers get whacked for $600 million, they're going to be a lot less likely to play in the sandbox. And that's kind of the kiss of death of the industry right now. So even if you have to put up, a few $100 million more to cover this hack, it might be worthwhile in the long run, because otherwise I think the industry is in trouble. People are going to figure out, because it seems like almost every week I report, yet another, some kind of cryptocurrency breach. And at some point, people are going to say, this is just too risky for me, too risky for my blood. As I always say, don't bet the mortgage payment on it. And then as a general category of hacks, and I think I have another one after this, Russia just is getting whacked right and left. It's really hard to keep track of them. This one is a Gazprom Lind Engineering. They lost about 700 gigabytes worth of data, and they design gas and petrochemical facilities and oil refineries. So this probably might give hackers secondary information in terms of how to go compromise these facilities, which might be of interest to the hackers depending on what their motivation is. If their motivation is to cause Russia a lot of pain and take out a refinery, that might be the data you need for it. And all this data is being made available for free. So, the money aspect, this is not money, this is for country. And there's a lot of people who seem to be interested in doing that. And then, to follow on that, every day it seems like we're seeing new breaches, and the data is that's stolen is in the terabytes worth of data. It's a massive amount of data. And it's cross industry, it's Russia's central bank, it's oil and gas, it's all over the place. So, if you're a Russian business person, and we saw one, a hack of a nuclear reactor, which is one of these fission reactors, I think, and something which the West is very interested to see how Russia's building these things. Next, Russia, one more time, this is the second time now, is wiping malware off users' computers, both without asking and in many cases without telling, because they don't know who the users are. This was, I think, a risky move. What they're doing is they're trying to get a hold of the command and control network for the botnet that is driving the malware, and having the botnet go off and issue instructions to the computers. So far in the 2 times they've done it, they've been successful. Will they be successful the next time? I don't know. I'd say that's about as risky as you can get, in my opinion. So we shall see. But at least 2 times they've been successful at it. Next, we have people tell stories about the microphone on my computer, on my phone is listening in on me, and mostly we attribute that to tinfoil hat crowd. But some researchers have discovered that the mute button on at least some of the video conferencing apps like WebEx and Zoom and stuff like that don't necessarily do what you think they're going to do. And a lot of them are software controlled, which means that you're counting on the software to do the right thing. In some cases they are, in some cases they aren't. Cisco was caught at this, and I don't think they were doing anything nefarious, but even when the mic was muted, they were still sending statistics back to mother Cisco to go off and tell Cisco what's going on. The best way to do this is, I'm going to try to do this, as a microphone with a hard switch on it. This one has a volume control and a on-off switch. Basically, if you cut the wires to the mic, you stand a pretty good chance that the microphone is really off. Beyond that, you are really counting on the software to work right and the software not to be hacked. At least at this point, it doesn't look like the Chinese are listening in to your Zoom calls, but given it's a software thing, that could certainly happen. So, if you're sensitive about it and you want to really be able to mute your mic, then get yourself a headset. You'll notice I always use a headset. Get yourself a headset with an on-off switch, and if you do that, then I think you're in pretty good shape. And last, we have the news bites for the week. Cyber Command is saying that chip shortage is a national security issue, and I think they're right. They explain why they think it is, but I think it definitely has the potential to become a national security issue. If it does, that's a real problem. Russian crooks, on the other hand, which I think is pretty entertaining, are worried that the Kremlin doing what it's doing is going to affect their ill-gotten loot, right? Some of which is in Russian banks, and if the value of the ruble, goes to zero or goes down significantly, so does their wealth. And if they have money outside of the country and some third party goes off and decides to seize it, well, that's a problem. So it's interesting. There's a lot of chatter apparently on the underground forums from these crooks about, is our loot safe? And the answer is maybe not. CISA is sent out an alert that tells people that there are a family of D-Link routers. They're very common that people put in homes that are vulnerable. And the problem is these are end of life, which means that D-Link is not going to patch them. It's not going to happen. And unfortunately, a lot of people say, well, it's still routing traffic, so why should I replace it? The bad guys are absolutely looking for these routers. So, for those of you who have employees who work from home, first question is, how many of them actually have some form of firewall at home? Probably a lot of them don't, but if they do, is it one of these that's no longer supported? And then what do you as a company do about that? Next, Microsoft has announced a bug in their remote procedure call runtime. It's a serious bug because it is a zero click, means it requires no user interaction. Remote code, which means that the bad guys can execute code remotely. It doesn't require the users to be authenticated, or the bad guys. Those are users too, I guess. So this is a really bad one. So watch this one. And lastly, we're seeing the cellular vendors taking down their 3G cellular networks, and they took down their 2G networks last year. Part of that, all of it, I guess, is because it costs them money to run the networks. Plus, they want to repurpose the bandwidth for 5G, and if they're running 3G on it, they can't do that. But the thing that's important to understand is there may be older IoT devices. If you have a CPAP machine that communicates with your doctor, if you have an alarm system, if you have any kind of things like that talk over the cellular network, the longest network that's going to be up is Verizon. They're going to turn theirs down at the end of the year. Probably that times along with contracts that they may have in place with vendors. But for your employees, it would be nice to tell them about that. But if you have any kind of IoT devices, alarms, thermostats, elevators, all those kind of things, don't count on that the vendor is going to go off and catch that for you and offer to fix it for free. In some cases, there are cell extenders that you can use that would allow you to go do that. In other cases, you may have to buy a box from the vendor that would upgrade that modem from 3G to at least 4G. And then other cases, you may have to replace the device. For example, I was looking at one CPAP machine. They said, well, if it can't communicate, you can always put a memory card in the device, and then you can mail that memory card. They kind of said to the doctor, but I don't think that works really well. You can mail the memory card back to them and get them to read the memory card. But that obviously defeats a lot of the purpose, and people are not going to do that. So, just understand, and that would point to the fact that you ought to have an inventory of your devices that communicate, so that what to look for later on. So that's all I have. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. And until next time, thank you for listening.
Turnkey Cybersecurity and Privacy Solutions offers the complete cybersecurity program for small to medium-sized businesses. They include everything needed to secure your business and meet compliance requirements. Visit our website at turnkeycybersecurityandprivacysolutions.com to learn more.